The sun rose slowly over Ikoyi, its light filtering through the dusty blinds of Café Anya like a secret being softly told. Lagos was already alive outside, the impatient honking of Danfo buses, the faint buzz of Okadas speeding past, and the scent of roasted ground nuts wafting from the roadside. But inside, the quiet little cafe, tucked between a bookshop and a tailor's shop, time moved slower. There, in her usual corner, Ezichi Nwoko sat with her back to the world, her fingers curled gently around a warm mug of black coffee. She didn't need sugar. Bitterness suited her. Ezichi was not the kind of woman you noticed immediately. She wore soft colors, rarely smiled in public, and never raised her voice. But there was something arresting about her, the way she stared out of the window, like she was watching a life that once belonged to her. A writer by profession, she crafted stories for children, tales of laughter, of bravery, of home. Yet her own life was wrapped in silence. The scar on her wrist peeked out from beneath her long sleeves, a silent witness to a night she never spoke of. It was old now, faded into her dark skin, but it pulsed with memory. Some mornings, like this one, she'd run her fingers over it absent-mindedly while waiting for her coffee to cool. The barista, an eager young man named Tega, brought her the same thing every day without asking. "Your table's waiting, Madam Author," he'd grin, wiping his hands on his apron as he handed her the cup. She offered him a nod in return, barely a smile. Still, the staff at Café Anya adored her. She tipped generously, never asked for much, and always left behind notes of encouragement in the tip jar. Quotes from Chinua Achebe, Wole Soyinka, and even Chimamanda. A small way of giving back, even from the quiet she lived in. Ezichi's life was a script of routines. Wake up at 5:30 a.m., journal for 30 minutes, walk to the cafe by 7 hours, write until 10, then edit at home until dusk. No detours, no surprises. The only thing unpredictable was the Lagos power supply, and even that she'd planned for with a small solar panel. Her family, a noisy ensemble of aunts and uncles in Surulere, often called to drag her back into their drama. She declined every wedding invitation, every burial meeting, every Sunday lunch. She claimed deadlines, exhaustion, or just silence. It was easier that way. And then there was Namdi, her ex, a man who once read her poetry like scripture, then shattered her world with betrayal. He had become a ghost she couldn't block. He'd send emails from fake accounts, follow her pseudonym online, even comment on her book reviews using inside jokes only they knew. Nothing threatening enough for police action, just enough to unsettle her peace. Sometimes she'd look over her shoulder, just in case. Her past clung to her like Lagos humidity, the traumatic event at university, the night she had trusted someone too much. She never spoke of it. Not to her mother, not to her therapist. It showed instead in the way she flinched when men raised their voices, in how she locked every bolt on her door twice before bed, in the absence of laughter in her stories. But here, in this cafe, with her hands warm around her coffee and a paperback open to chapter 4, she found fragments of safety. Until today. A shadow fell across her table, not like the afternoon sun dancing through the blinds, but like a storm rolling in without warning. She looked up, expecting Tega, maybe a customer asking for directions, but instead, a man sat down without a word, tall, sharp-suited. His cologne was subtle but distinct, something expensive, foreign. His eyes were unreadable, the color of old wood and secrets. He didn't blink much, didn't ask to sit. Ezichi froze, her breath catching mid-sip. "Excuse me." He reached across the table, lifted her mug, and brought it to his lips. He sipped slowly, eyes locked on hers. And then he said it. "From this sip, you belong to me." Long before the world called him a kingpin or whispered his name with caution in penthouses and government offices, Adirika Obasi was a boy running barefoot through the red sands of Aba, chasing after goats with a belly that knew hunger more than laughter. That boy died the night his compound burned, when screams replaced lullabies, and machetes swung where bedtime stories should have ended. His mother hid him beneath a water drum, her last act of love. He survived by listening to silence, a silence filled with gunshots and the crackle of fire. He never cried. Now, decades later, the boy had become something else entirely. Adirika Obasi was the owner of Obasi Holdings, a global tech conglomerate with fingers in finance, oil, telecoms, and arms. Above ground, he was the picture of polished power, a mogul who hosted charity galas, sat beside presidents, and funded STEM schools in Nigeria. But in the shadows, they called him the Jaguar, because he never pounced without precision, and he always killed clean. There were rules to his madness, rituals, boundaries he created to protect what was left of the boy under the drum. He never drank from any cup he hadn't watched poured, never let anyone touch his food, never entered a room without scanning exits. It wasn't paranoia, it was survival. Trust was a myth, love a weapon. And yet, he drank from her cup. Ezichi Nwoko. He saw her first in a frame, an overhead security camera from a café his company bought 2 years ago. Not for business, for surveillance. Obasi Holdings monitored locations all over Lagos, watching movements, recording habits. But when he saw her, alone, serene, with eyes that looked like they'd seen storms, he paused the video. Then he rewound it. Then again. She didn't look at her phone, didn't flirt, didn't chase fame. She read and drank coffee, as if the world couldn't reach her. Her loneliness wasn't desperation. It was choice. He became obsessed. He sent his top enforcer, Maya, to gather intel. No connections, no sugar daddies, no clubs. Untouched, unclaimed, unknown, Maya reported, raising one brow. She's either hiding something or hiding from something. It intrigued Adirika even more. He had women, goddesses of Lagos nightlife, foreign heiresses, diplomats' daughters. They came to him like moths to fire. But Ezichi? She was water, still, deep, possibly drowning. And perhaps, just perhaps, she was the only one who wouldn't be burned by his fire. Maya disagreed. He always did. She's light, the bodyguard warned. You are shadow. This ends in blood. Adirika didn't respond. He rarely did when he'd already made up his mind. His rules meant nothing the moment he stepped into that cafe. He wore full black, a sleek turtleneck, tailored trousers, a trench coat that brushed the floor. No guards, no entourage, just the weight of legacy behind every step. He watched her before she noticed him, observed how she stirred her coffee, not out of habit, but as if preparing to taste a moment. How she ran her finger down the page of her book, like she wanted to live inside it. He sat across from her without asking. When she looked up, startled, something shifted. He felt it in his chest. Not affection, not desire. Recognition. And without a word, he picked up her mug and drank, breaking every rule he had. Her eyes didn't flinch. Not quite. She was afraid, but not screaming. From this sip, he said, his voice low and final, you belong to me. She blinked once, twice, confused, then angry, then silent again. He stood, adjusted his cuffs. I'll return, he said softly. Don't change anything. Don't run. That afternoon, Café Anya received a silent transfer from an offshore account, enough money to triple its worth. Tega the barista cried and hugged the owner. No one knew why, but the deed changed hands. And that evening, Ezichi received a sealed note, slipped under her cafe bill. I've bought this place. You'll be here when I return. Ezichi couldn't breathe properly for days after that first encounter. The memory of his eyes lingered, dark, deep, and completely unreadable, like a sea where too many bodies had been buried. There was nothing casual about the way he looked at her. It wasn't desire. It wasn't admiration. It was possession, and something even more dangerous, recognition. The next morning, a bouquet of red roses arrived at Café Anya. No note, no name, just a single rose lying on top of her usual corner table. Tega, wide-eyed, claimed a black SUV had dropped it off. She left it untouched. Then came the book, an out-of-print, leather-bound edition of The Palm Wine Drinkard wrapped in silk. Hand-delivered by a courier who refused to speak. She returned it. 2 days later, it was in her mailbox, with a letter tucked inside. I read this after the fire. Now I want to read it with you. Ayo. She didn't know whether to be flattered or afraid. The line between both blurred quickly. Strangers began opening doors for her at banks and supermarkets, nodding respectfully without greeting. A sleek, black Prado followed her home from the café more than once. She assumed it was him, or at least someone who answered to him. One evening, on her way to visit her mother in Surulere, she noticed a man leaning against a kiosk 2 streets from the house. He wasn't selling anything, just standing, watching. When she returned hours later, he was gone. But her mother mentioned how some strange, fine man had offered to fix her broken window and left before she could thank him. The next day, her landlord knocked. "Your lease is no longer necessary," he said, avoiding her eyes. "Someone has compensated me fully. You're free to go." She found a briefcase of money on the floor just beyond the door. Then Adirika came. No warning, no message. He walked into her apartment like he'd always belonged there. No guards, no chaos, just presence. She was standing in her tiny kitchen, frozen, holding a glass of water. "Pack 1 bag," he said calmly. "Nothing more. I'm not going anywhere with you. You already have." She wanted to argue, scream, call someone. But her hands betrayed her. They trembled. And when he stepped closer, not touching, just standing near enough for her to smell that familiar cologne again, her will collapsed like wet paper. She packed 1 bag. The ride to Banana Island was silent. The gates to his mansion opened automatically, revealing a modern fortress of glass and steel, wrapped in silence and opulence. The air was scented, cool, unnaturally still. The house was mostly empty, designed with brutal elegance, large, cold spaces, minimal furniture, walls that whispered instead of speaking. He took her to a room on the east wing. It was warm, soft, completely unlike the rest of the house. "This is your space," he said. "I had it done in case you ever arrived." "How long have you—" "Sleep. We'll speak tomorrow." She didn't sleep. She stared at the ceiling all night, wrapped in sheets that smelled like new beginnings and unsaid things. The days that followed were strange, beautiful, terrifying. The staff moved around her like ghosts, efficient, invisible. They never spoke unless she addressed them. Meals appeared without request. Books were replaced with rare editions. A piano was delivered to the living room. She hadn't played since childhood. Fresh flowers were arranged in her writing space every morning. He didn't touch her. Not once. He simply watched her work, seated silently across the room as she wrote, eyes closed in thought or tracking her fingers on the keyboard. Sometimes he would ask her to read aloud. She didn't know why she obeyed. "You make pain sound like poetry," he once said. "You turn silence into something holy." She wanted to ask him why he chose her, why he was doing all this. But fear held her tongue hostage. Then, one evening, while exploring a corridor near the west wing, she noticed something strange, a panel that wasn't flush with the wall. Curiosity overpowered her caution. She pressed it. A door clicked open. Inside was a dark room filled with screens, monitors arranged neatly, blinking softly. Each one showed footage of her. At the cafe, on the street, in her old apartment, in her mother's kitchen. A gentle whimper echoed from one of the speakers. Ezichi stepped closer. One screen showed her mother, tied to a chair, crying. Ezichi stared at the screen, her mother's tears like acid in her chest. She barely heard the quiet footsteps behind her. When she turned, Adirika was there, leaning against the doorframe like he had been waiting. "She's safe now," he said softly. "I just needed you to know why I did all of this." His words dropped like stones. Ezichi didn't scream. She didn't cry. She just stood there, arms folded tightly across her chest, staring at him as if seeing him for the first time. "I'm protecting you," he continued, stepping into the room, "from people who would have already ended your life if I hadn't intervened." "What people?" her voice cracked. "People your father knew," Adirika said, his face hardening. "He was an informant. He worked with Interpol against the Obidiki cartel, until they found out. They killed him. You were never told the truth." Ezichi felt the floor tilt beneath her. Her father had died in a car accident, or so she'd always believed. A tire burst, a rainy night, simple, tragic, end of story. "He was hunted," Adirika said. "He died protecting you. They never found out who he was truly working for. But if they ever connected the dots to you—" "You've been watching me?" Her voice was sharp now, a blade. He nodded. "Since you were in university. The night you were attacked, I stopped it. You never saw me, but I was there. I've saved you more times than I can count." Ezichi staggered back like she'd been slapped. "Do you think that makes this okay?" she asked, voice rising. "Spying on me? Buying my café? Controlling my life like I'm one of your goddamn properties?" "I don't own you," he said softly. "I just couldn't lose you." The sincerity in his voice cut deeper than any threat could have. She ran, barefoot, without her phone, without thinking. The mansion's gates opened at her scream, and she bolted into the Lagos streets, her lungs burning, her mind collapsing under the weight of too many truths. But Lagos, as always, was chaotic. At a busy junction in Lekki, she got caught in traffic, hundreds of honking cars, motorbikes weaving, angry voices shouting. She pushed past a crowd of street hawkers when a black van screeched beside her. The door slid open. Rough hands grabbed her arms. Everything blurred, but just as quickly, gunshots rang. Out, clean, precise. Her captors fell. A figure emerged from the smoke. Adirika, face twisted in rage, blood on his knuckles. He didn't call her name. He just swept her into his arms and carried her through the chaos like a man who had already lost too much to let go of one more thing. Back in the mansion, silence returned. He sat beside her on the edge of the bathtub, cleaning the scrapes on her knees, hands trembling as they pressed cotton to her skin. Blood from the fight still dotted his shirt. His eyes, usually cold and commanding, were glassy. "I don't know how to love," he whispered, almost to himself. "I only know how to protect." Ezichi didn't speak. She watched him. This man who ruled empires, who terrified governments, who killed to keep her alive, and still, who believed love was beyond him. That night, in her sanctuary room, she sat down at her desk and opened a fresh journal. For the first time in months, the words poured. She wrote about him, not the jaguar, not the billionaire, but the boy under the drum in Abba, the man with trembling hands, the man who built a fortress, not to imprison her, but to shield her from the world that tried to take her father. 2 nights later, she read it to him. He sat across the room, in his usual chair. No words, just listening. When she finished, silence stretched like a held breath between them. Then she stood, walked over slowly, and kissed him. Not out of pity, not out of fear, but from something raw and deep, growing between the shadows they both carried. His hand lingered on her waist. His eyes searched hers. But the moment cracked with the sound of gunshots echoing through the estate, muffled, close, real. Adirika stood instantly. No hesitation. The mansion was under siege. The first gunshot shattered the quiet, like a scream in church. Then came the second, louder, closer. Glass rained down from the upper balcony as masked men flooded the estate grounds. Floodlights exploded. Sirens howled in the distance. Then were silenced, cut off before help could come. The Kalu syndicate had arrived. Adirika didn't flinch. His hand slid into the hidden compartment of his desk before the second shot finished echoing. A Glock, fully loaded. He moved like a ghost of war. Swift, deliberate. Maya, his second in command, appeared at the door, already barking orders into his comms. "Secure the east wing. Keep her out of sight." Ezichi stood frozen near the doorway, still tasting the memory of their kiss. But reality crashed in. Her breath grew ragged as Adirika grabbed her hand, pulling her through a back hallway she never knew existed. "The panic room," he said. "Stay inside, no matter what you hear." They entered a steel-reinforced vault, disguised as a wine cellar. Inside were walls lined with monitors. Every camera in the house displayed in stark black and white. Gunfire popped like fireworks on screen. Adirika's men, dressed in tactical gear, fought like wolves, protecting sacred ground. The Kalu syndicate fought dirtier. Molotovs, machetes, ambush tactics. Ezichi clutched the back of a leather chair, her body trembling. Adirika turned to her. "You stay here. Do not come out. I'm not leaving you out there." His eyes were ice. "You are not a soldier. You are the reason I fight." Then he was gone. Moments passed like hours. On screen, she watched the battle unfold like a film written in blood. Hallways erupted in smoke. Shadows danced under strobe lights of muzzle flashes. The east gate blew open. Bodies fell. Maya moved like a machine, covering the west corridor. And then, her breath caught. A masked figure appeared on screen, already inside the inner sanctum. No gun, just a dagger. And he was moving toward the panic room. A soft hiss broke the silence behind her. The hidden door creaked open. She turned. The assassin stood in the doorway, tall, silent, masked. He raised the blade and whispered, "Ezichi!" She screamed. Before he could strike, a blur of motion collided with him. Adirika. The two men fought like animals. The assassin moved fast, but Adirika was faster. He slammed the attacker into the steel wall, fists flying. The dagger sliced across his side, deep. But he didn't stop. He snapped the man's neck with one brutal twist and collapsed. Blood pooled beneath him. "No!" Ezichi dropped to her knees, pressing against the wound, her hands shaking. "Stay with me, please." He touched her face, his palm warm and sticky. "Fly her out. Now," he whispered to Maya, who had just burst into the room. "The Seychelles jet is ready." But Ezichi refused. "I'm not leaving him." "We don't have time," Maya barked. "I said no." It took all of them, 3 guards and Maya, to convince her. The helicopter lifted from the estate roof at dawn, its blades slicing the sky over a ruined mansion. Adirika lay unconscious beside her, pale, bandaged, his head in her lap. In the private clinic in Victoria Island, silence returned. For hours she sat beside his hospital bed, watching the beeping of monitors. He looked smaller now, mortal. His fingers twitched in pain. His breath was labored. She turned to Maya, who stood guard like a stone figure. "Why does he care this much?" she asked. "I'm just a woman he watched in a café." Maya hesitated. Then, silently, he handed her a worn, leather-bound journal. "This will answer your questions." Ezichi opened the first page. Photos, hundreds of them, some from recent months, others older. One caught her breath. It was her, in her university dorm, laughing with a friend on the balcony. She didn't even remember the photo being taken. Another, her on the day of her father's funeral, eyes red, surrounded by family. Another, her, 10 years old, walking out of school in uniform, clutching a lunchbox. The pages turned slowly, every image a confession. And then, a handwritten line that stilled her soul. "The girl who lived because I killed for her." Ezichi read the line again, her hands trembling. "The girl who lived because I killed for her." Her father's name appeared multiple times in the journal. Obina Nwoko, scribbled beside numbers, maps, and dates. She flipped through the pages faster, her chest tightening with every revelation. Her father was not just an informant. He was Adirika's mentor. She found old photographs pressed between the pages, grainy shots of 2 men at a dusty compound in Aba. A younger Adirika standing beside her father, both in plain shirts, eyes burning with a shared purpose. Notes scribbled in the margins spoke of missions, intel, coded messages. Her father had recruited Adirika for Interpol undercover work, then shielded him when the Kalu syndicate closed in. But then came the betrayal. Her father had been ordered to give up Adirika to save his own life. He refused. Days later, his car accident happened. Ezichi shut the journal and pressed it against her chest. The story she'd been told all her life, the rainy night, the burst tire, was a lie built on blood and silence. And then, as if a floodgate had opened, memories began to surface in her sleep. Nightmares of being hurried onto a plane as a child, her father's hand gripping hers so tightly it hurt. His whispered words in Igbo, "Don't forget who you are." Then blackness. Airports. A strange house abroad. Months of not speaking. Her mother telling her, it was just a bad dream. You're safe now. But she hadn't been safe. She had just been hidden. In the journal, she found something else. A photograph of a woman. Elegant, smiling. Her face so like Ezichi's, it was as if she were looking at herself in a mirror, tilted slightly by time. On the back of the photo, Chinatsa, 2015. Maya caught her staring at it. That was his fiancée, he said. She died. How? Ezichi asked. No one knows. Some say she drowned. Some say she was taken. All I know is he never spoke her name again. Ezichi's throat tightened. The resemblance was undeniable. The same eyes, the same sharp jawline, even the same natural hairstyle she wore now. Was she being loved or replaced? That night, she couldn't stay in the mansion any longer. The glass walls, once elegant, now felt like a trap of reflections she couldn't escape. She packed a small bag, the same one she had brought, and walked out without a word. No guards tried to stop her, no cars followed. Adirika let her go. She took a cab back to Ikoyi. Café Anya looked smaller now, its windows clouded with steam, the air thick with roasted beans. Tega blinked twice when she walked in. Madam Author, it's been weeks. I'm just here to write, she said quietly. She sat at her old corner table, ordered her old black coffee, and opened her laptop. Her hands hovered over the keys. Then she began. Her story poured out like water from a cracked dam. She didn't use names. She didn't say billionaire. She didn't say mafia. She called him the man who watched me sleep. She wrote about the roses, the briefcases of money, the panic room, the journal, the woman in the photograph. She wrote until the cafe closed, and then she published it, anonymously. By the next morning, the post had gone viral, on Twitter, on Facebook, on obscure forums she had never heard of. People shared it with captions like, "This can't be real, but I can't stop reading." Bloggers dissected every paragraph. Someone made a thread speculating about the real identities behind the story. A Lagos influencer called it the confession of the decade. Ezichi sat at her table, heart pounding, watching the numbers climb. Then she saw the comment. It wasn't like the others. No emojis, no hashtags. It simply read, "You're not safe. They're coming." The message came at midnight. A single gloved hand clamped over Ezichi's mouth as she left Café Anya, dragging her into the shadows. Her scream was muffled. A needle kissed her neck, then nothing. When she awoke, the air smelled of smoke and perfume and fear. Neon lights flickered above her, bleu, rouge, noir. Music thumped through concrete walls. She was no longer in Nigeria. Paris, a nightclub, underground, hidden beneath the Seine. The Kalu syndicate had her. A woman with cold eyes and crimson lipstick leaned close. "You're very special to him," she said, "and that makes you valuable to us." They didn't ask for ransom. They asked for betrayal. "We want him dead," the woman whispered. "You'll bring him here. Make him believe you're in danger. He'll come running." Ezichi spat at her. They smiled and turned the screws tighter. For days they played her videos, fake ones, crafted with AI. Adirika shot in the head. Adirika's mansion in flames. Adirika calling her name as blood poured from his mouth. The screams sounded real. Too real. She curled into herself, whispering, "He's not dead. He's not dead. He's not dead." She stopped eating, stopped speaking. In the silence of her cell, she relived memories like lifelines. The night Adirika tried to learn how to dance for her, fumbling through Afrobeats in his marble-floored living room, stepping on her toes, then laughing for the first time she'd ever heard. The way he fell asleep mid-sentence while reading her manuscript, head on her lap, mouth slightly open. The time he fixed her mother's leaky ceiling himself, because I don't trust workers with what she breathes. Memories became armor. And then the music stopped. The door opened. Ezichi blinked in the sudden flood of light. And there he was, Adirika Obasi, dressed in a simple black suit. No guards, no weapon. Just him. 30 guns were pointed at his chest. But he didn't flinch. He walked into the room as if he had nothing left to lose. "I'm here," he said, voice calm as thunder. "So let's end this." The Yashid room went still. The Kalu leader stood, amused. "No guards? No backup? You truly are a romantic fool." Adirika's gaze never wavered. "I have killed men for less than what you've done. But today, I came to reclaim what you stole. Not with violence. With truth." He turned to Ezichi. "I came because I promised you safety. And I never break promises, even when I should." She wept, loud, shaking, gasping. Then she moved. Ezichi twisted against her restraints, head-butted the guard holding her, grabbed his gun mid-fall. A shot rang out, then chaos. Adirika dove behind a pillar, grabbed a second pistol from an ankle holster. Bullets flew. Glass shattered. Bodies dropped. Ezichi and Adirika fought like they'd trained for this all their lives, covering each other, shouting instructions, bleeding but standing. When it ended, the floor was slick with ruin. The Kalu syndicate lay broken, those who lived scattered into the Paris night. Ezichi and Adirika emerged into the early dawn, wounded, breathing together. On the private jet back to Lagos, no words passed between them for hours. Then she reached for his hand, held it, didn't let go. As the plane landed, red lights flashed across the runway. Government vehicles surrounded them before the engines even cooled. Federal agents. One man stepped forward, clean-shaven, well-dressed, with the arrogance of those who wear power, like cologne. "You're both under arrest," he said, eyes sharp. "This isn't just about cartels anymore." Ezichi stepped in front of Adirika. "For what?" "For surviving," the agent said, smiling coldly. "This is bigger than mafia, madam. The presidency is involved." The interrogation room was colder than it needed to be. Steel chairs, 2 cameras, no clocks. Adirika Obasi sat across from 3 men who ran Nigeria not from office buildings, but from dark hallways, briefcases, and oil contracts, men who were never voted for, yet, who answered only to power itself. "You've become too visible," one of them said, sipping tea. "You broke the unwritten rule," the second murmured. "You let love make you weak." The third leaned forward. "Step down. Disappear. Or we erase you." Adirika didn't blink. His hands rested calmly on the table, wrists free, because no one dared cuff him. He said only one thing. "I've faced men like you before. You're never the last." They left without another word. But the consequences came swiftly. His bank accounts were frozen. His private security licenses revoked. Obasi holding stocks plummeted overnight. Partners withdrew. His staff, dozens of men who had bled for him, were arrested, their homes raided. The elite circles of Lagos, once so quick to bow, now turned their backs. Ezichi watched it all unfold like a slow-motion collapse. And still, she stayed. The federal agent came to her alone 2 days later. "You can walk free," he said. "All we need is your signature. A statement that you were coerced, manipulated, victimized." She almost laughed, then cried. "No." She said it with shaking hands, but she said it. And when she returned to what was left of their penthouse, she found Adirika standing by the window, watching Lagos flicker in the distance like a dying ember. He didn't turn when she entered. He just said softly, "They will destroy everything I've built." She stepped beside him, took his hand. "Then let's build something new." That night, with no audience, no ceremony, no ring, he proposed. No words, just a look, a silence, a breath held between 2 people who had survived war. She whispered, "Yes." And the next morning, they were gone. They traveled under false names, through dusty roads, into the northern stretch of Nigeria where signal was scarce and suspicion ran high. There, they settled in a small village near a river, where time moved slowly and the nights echoed with frogs and owls. Their new home was a mud house, warm, simple, with no guards and no glass walls. He built her a writing table by hand. She taught local children to read under mango trees. They fetched water. They cooked with firewood. They were free. In that stillness, Adirika became someone else. He laughed more, grew a beard, told her stories of Abba. Not the blood, but the mangoes, the music, the way rain hit zinc roofs like drumming. He was still haunted, yes, but lighter. And she rediscovered herself. Not just as Ezichi the writer, but as a woman who could plant, who could love, who could start again without fear. Then one day, just as the sun began to bleed over the river, she heard it. A drone. Low. Mechanical. Unmistakable. She ran to the field where Adirika was harvesting okra. He had already heard it. He looked up at the sky, face unreadable. "They found us," she said, breathless. He didn't deny it. Instead, he reached into the soil and pulled out a small, rusted box, sealed with a code. He placed it in her hands. "If I die," he said quietly, "burn everything. Don't let them take my legacy. Not my truth. Not you." She stared at him, mouth open. Her fingers tightened around the box, and above them, the drone circled closer. The drone never struck. It circled, scanned, then vanished into the clouds, like a warning. That night, Adirika didn't sleep. He spread maps across the mud floor, codes, bank transfers, offshore logs, and Ezichi, once a quiet observer of his world, stepped forward and began to speak like she belonged in it. "Split the assets," she said. "Diversify through shell corporations. Use the Swiss accounts. I'll write the letters. You move the money." He watched her with quiet awe. From that day on, Ezichi became his second brain. Sharp, cold, strategic, and still impossibly loving. She crafted fronts, designed charities that doubled as financial shields, handled communications under encrypted aliases. Every dollar the government froze was replaced by tens that she rerouted before dawn. Within months, the world whispered of the return of Obasi holdings, not in Nigeria, but in silent corridors of Dubai, Malta, the Cayman Islands. The name never appeared on paper, but the power returned, faceless and unstoppable. And beside it stood a woman. In boardrooms, Ezichi was unrecognizable. Gone were the cardigans and soft sandals. She wore sharp suits now, charcoal, wine red, emerald, her natural hair coiled into a crown. She spoke only when needed, and when she did, billionaires fell silent. Behind closed doors, they called her the widow who lived. But she wasn't a widow. She was a queen. And Adirika, her once feared jaguar, was finally at peace by her side. Flashbacks flickered in her memory like old film reels. The first day she walked into Café Anya. The first time she kissed him. The way her voice once shook while reading her own stories. Now, she stood at the helm of an empire built not from blood alone, but from survival, precision, and love honed in fire. Still, Ezichi never forgot who she was. Quietly, anonymously, she funneled millions into shelters across Nigeria, women escaping abuse, girls sold into trafficking, mothers lost in silence. She named each transfer after a woman she knew, her late aunt, her dorm mate from university, her mother, and she wrote again. Love After War became her newest story, a tale of a girl who loved a man who wasn't supposed to feel, a man who built walls so high the world couldn't reach him, until she did. It sold millions, but she never promoted it, never gave interviews, because this love wasn't for the world, it was for him. On her birthday, Adirika blindfolded her. When she opened her eyes, they stood on a strip of land surrounded by sapphire water. The island was untouched. Palm trees swayed. A glass house stood in the distance. "It's yours," he whispered. "No one else will ever touch it." A month later, they married. On a cliff overlooking the ocean, they wore black, his suit tailored to shadow, her gown rippling like a storm. No guests, no cameras. Only the wind, the sky, and the vow whispered between two souls who had burned and survived. "You belong to me now," she said, her voice fierce, trembling with joy. He smiled, and for the first time cried. The world assumed they were ghosts, vanished, perhaps dead. Their enemies searched, plotted, failed. Meanwhile, the empire grew, quiet, unseen, until one call shattered everything. It came late, 2:47 a.m. Her encrypted line buzzed once, then again. Ezichi answered, her voice calm. A distorted voice spoke. "Your mother. We have her." Her blood ran cold. "What do you want?" "To save her," the voice said, "you must betray your husband." She hadn't worn a disguise in years. But now, Ezichi moved through Lagos with a hood over her braids, glasses over her eyes, and silence in her steps. The humid city hadn't changed. Buses still swerved like chaos had. A schedule. Generators still hummed like background music to survival. And hawkers still chased cars in traffic with sachet water and plantain chips. Only she had changed. She met the federal agent at a decaying hotel on the mainland. The same man who once arrested her and called her collateral. "You're late," he said. "I'm not here to be polite," she replied. He slid a small device across the table, a wire, thin, skin-toned, designed to record everything and transmit it in real time. "You wear this. Get him to admit something, anything, and we'll erase your name. Your mother walks free." Her voice wavered. "She better not be hurt." "She's alive for now. You have 24 hours. Back on the private jet to their island, Ezichi felt the weight of the wire under her blouse. It wasn't the plastic, it was the betrayal. She found Adirika on the veranda, watching the tide roll in like clockwork. "Lagos?" he asked without turning. She nodded. He looked at her. His eyes, always sharp, softened as he studied her face. "Who did they take from you this time?" Her throat caught. "My mother." He stepped forward. His hand hovered over her chest, right above where the wire sat. "You're wired." It wasn't a question. "I didn't want to be." "I know." And then, in the strange dance only two wounded people can do, they began a conversation in code. She spoke of the weather, but meant the agent. He asked about the power company, meaning the presidency. She said, "The lights are unstable." He replied, "Then we'll light candles instead." Each word laced with memory, pain, a past that couldn't be undone, but also couldn't be denied. They walked together by the ocean. The device picked up everything, but nothing it could use. That night, she stood in their room, trembling. He watched her from the bed, bare-chested, the moonlight slicing across his scars. "You have a choice," he said, "them or me." She didn't reply, just walked to the fireplace, pulled the recorder from beneath her blouse, and held it in the flame. It burned fast. Ezichi closed her eyes as the smell of melting plastic filled the room. The next morning, her mother was released, dropped at a hospital gate, unconscious, but not untouched. She died before Ezichi arrived, poisoned. The woman who raised her with broken fingers and borrowed faith. The woman who taught her to read Proverbs aloud when there was no electricity. The only person who once told her, "God gave you silence, so you could hear your own voice." Ezichi held her in the hospital bed, tears soaking the white sheets. She didn't scream, didn't curse. But something inside her cracked. At the funeral, a storm rolled in. Thunder shuddered through the clouds. No one else came, just her, and Adirika in full black. For the first time in his adult life, he wept. Ezichi didn't console him, didn't need to. Her grief had evolved into something sharper. Vengeance. Not for herself. For the woman who gave her hope. That night, she walked into their closet and chose her weapon. A red dress, satin, blood-colored, fitted like fire. She looked in the mirror and saw herself, not Ezichi the writer, or Ezichi the hunted, or even Ezichi the lover. She saw the queen Adirika had built a kingdom for. She kissed her husband softly, like a promise. "I'm going to end this." And with heels clicking like war drums, she stepped into the private jet bound for Lagos. No guards, no team, just her and her rage. At the enemy's compound, doors opened before she could knock. They had heard she was coming. Ezichi stepped into the lair of those who poisoned her mother, who shattered her silence, who tried to make her a puppet. She stood at the center of the room, surrounded by men who thought fear made them powerful. She raised her chin and said coldly, "I'm the wife of the man you fear, and I've come to end this." Ezichi did not walk into the final war with a gun. She came with a laptop, a hard drive, and a pen. Inside the high-rise hotel suite in Victoria Island that served as her war room, the air was thick with urgency. Coders, journalists, whistleblowers, all gathered in silence around her, waiting for the command. She gave it with one word: now. In the next hour, the Kalu syndicate began to fall. Hundreds of documents hit the web: financial records, secret offshore accounts, audio recordings, witness statements. Years of corruption laid bare. They had laundered billions, trafficked arms, silenced opponents. The files were irrefutable. Every signature, every voice authenticated. Every lie cracked open. Banks panicked. International allies cut ties. Arrest warrants bloomed across borders. News channels broke the story at once. The billionaire's widow, who brought down a syndicate. Ezichi Nwoko, storyteller turned whistleblower. Justice, Nigerian style. But Ezichi wasn't done. She launched a digital campaign. We're not shadows. Victims of mafia abuse, corrupt regimes, and silent violence flooded social media with their stories. Her words became fire. They tried to bury us, but we were seeds. This is not revenge. This is revelation. She didn't just destroy the Kalu syndicate. She dismantled their mythology. The streets of Lagos surged with protest. Young people marched with her quotes on banners. Journalists who had been afraid to write finally spoke. Victims gave interviews. For once, the streets didn't cry blood. They cried justice. Ezichi became a symbol of resistance. But the shadows weren't done with her yet. 3 weeks after the final leak, she and Adirika were driving through Lekki in an unmarked car. A quiet dinner, a short ride home. Then, fire. A flash of orange ripped through the night. The car spun. Metal screamed. Tires exploded. The ground shattered. Adirika took the brunt of it. She awoke on the asphalt, bleeding from her temple, screaming his name. He was dragged from the wreckage, unconscious, barely breathing. The doctors said the blast ruptured a lung, fractured 3 ribs, and caused a traumatic brain injury. He was put in a coma, his body fighting to stay. Ezichi didn't leave the hospital for days. She sat beside him, whispering stories, holding his hand, refusing food. Her red dress hung in the corner like a flag at half-mast. Outside, Lagos burned again. But not in fear. In fury. Rioters stormed government buildings. Protesters blocked bridges. Students wrote her name in chalk on school walls. They weren't just fighting for her anymore. They were fighting for themselves. When she finally stood before cameras, bare-faced, tired, grieving, the world stopped. She looked straight into the lens and said, "We are not shadows. We are stories. And you can't kill a story once it's been told." Her next book launched within a week. The Coffee We Never Finished. Part memoir, part manifesto, part love letter. It told everything. The cafe, the mansion, the wire, the betrayal, the survival. It sold 2 million copies in 10 days. Translations spread across Africa, then the globe. Teachers read it in classrooms. Women whispered it in market stalls. Girls carried it in backpacks, like armor. And still, Adirika slept. Until one rain-soaked morning in the hospital, she sat beside him, eyes red, voice hoarse, reading aloud from the final page. He stirred, then blinked, then whispered, "Did we win?" Ezichi leaned close, placed her forehead against his. "No," she said, smiling through her tears. "But we're alive." The air in Joe's carried a different kind of silence. Not the tense, stifled kind that once filled mansion halls and panic rooms, but a silence full of stories waiting to be told. It was the kind of quiet Ezichi Nwoko had fought her whole life to find. Now, she shared it. At the edge of a vast green plateau stood a modest campus, the Obasi Institute for Literary Girls. Terracotta walls, classrooms with open windows, chalkboards covered in poetry and broken syntax. Laughter echoed across the courtyard as girls recited stanzas beneath trees, their notebooks full of power, not fear. Ezichi walked among them daily, quiet as ever, famous now, but reclusive. She never gave interviews, refused television appearances. Her face was barely seen, though her name lived in headlines and history books. Inside the classroom, the girls read "The Coffee We Never Finished" aloud, line by line, as if it were sacred text. Outside, under the acacia tree, Adirika Obasi sat in the shade, watching them with eyes softened by time. He walked with a cane now, his body slower, his voice more gravel than steel. But the storm in him had passed. The shadows no longer whispered at night, and in the slow rhythm of village life, he had found peace. Sometimes he would read the girls' security reports like bedtime stories, twisting espionage into parables. They adored him, called him Uncle D. Ezichi, now his wife of many years, would smile from her office window, her heart as full as the silence that had once imprisoned her. Once a week, they visited Lagos, not to speak, not to be seen, just to sit. The café had been rebuilt. Café Anya, still small, still fragrant with roasted beans and warmth, stood quietly in Ikoyi like a portal to the beginning. The new owner left the corner table untouched, out of respect, out of myth. Ezichi and Adirika returned every October 4th, the date of their first meeting. They never told anyone. No entourage, no cameras, just 2 cups, 1 black coffee, 1 tea with honey. This time, both cups were full. They sat in silence for a long while. He looked at her, older now, eyes lined with pain and survival, and smiled. Her laugh came gently. And suddenly, he saw it all again. That first day, from his own memory, he had walked into the café with one purpose: to end his life. His empire was crumbling, the Kalu syndicate closing in. He was tired, the ghosts of his past too many. He had come to that place to take his final drink, write his last words, and disappear into the Lagos lagoon. Until he saw her. Ezichi, reading. Alone. Calm in a way he had never known. Something in her stillness tethered him. A woman who lived in silence but didn't fear it. A woman who didn't run from solitude. She looked up, and he sat down. And instead of dying that day, he lived. Now, years later, she reached across the table and took his hand. They said no words. They didn't need to. She picked up the coffee cup between them, poured it again, held it to her lips, then passed it to him. He took it, sipped, then smiled. "From this sip," he whispered. She met his eyes, warmth blooming in her chest.